today I think is an example where we can look at a community that's looking at major shifts, major economic development and growth in our community through the lens of what we're going to hear today from Jerry Berry. So I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that you're all here today. We're really pleased that you're here. We will be sending out a survey afterwards just asking for your feedback on this session, and to take a moment to invite Andrew Laidlaw to come up and introduce our speaker today. Thank you.
Thanks, Colleen. And first of all, we would like to extend on behalf of the city appreciation to the Chamber for working with us in the session today. This has been great, and this is an opportunity to host our partners in the community and the people we work with. So this is Local Government Awareness Week, and as city staff, that may not get you excited, but it gets us excited as city staff. And we have been working this morning with a group of students to try and talk to them about the importance of local engagement and participation with the city. And we were quite impressed with their enthusiasm. So today, we'd like to talk to you about local government, its role as communities, and its role relative to the provincial and senior governments. And we'd like to get across the message that we are more than just taps and toilets. The role of the city in most local governments is to provide the discussion on defining our community, what its services should be, and to develop what we commonly call a pride of place. We have 3 representatives who are part of that process of your City Council with us today, and I'd just like to acknowledge them. Councillor Larry Sampson, Councillor Mary Story, and Councillor Claire Mobley. So our presenter today is Mr. Jerry Berry, and Jerry, I think at this point, from my point of view, is first and foremost an educator. Jerry does education to newly elected representatives across the province through the British Columbia municipalities. He does teaching at Capilano University College to students who are looking at entering this field. And he does workshops for city councils and local government organizations across the province. He is also, I would say, the preeminent local government consultant at this time, and he works for a number of different organizations ranging from regional districts to cities to airport authorities. Jerry has had significant experience in the field, and he has worked 22 years as a city manager for the city of Nanaimo. And for those of you who may or may not know the city manager role, they don't tend to have a long shelf life in many communities, so that's pretty significant that he's been able to do that. So I'd like you to welcome Jerry, and hope you can take something away from our discussion today on local governments in British Columbia.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you very much for having me here. We just have to do a little bit of logistical shift over here, and I will be right with you. While I'm doing that, I can tell you that my name really is Jerry Berry, and we were talking about history and a place and change. My father's name is Jerry Berry. My grandfather's name's Jerry Berry, and my son's name's Christopher. So things can change in history, and that's a little bit what we're going to talk about today. And I also just want to start by thanking the Chamber and thanking the city for having me here. It's great to have an opportunity to subject you to my views on local government. These are only my views. They're not necessarily correct, and sometimes I can sound somewhat. Just one moment, please. So the reason for this is that we are trying to record the sound at the same time as we are taping, as well as using the hand mic. Apologies to our mother, Paul. I've taken my jacket off. No, now this mic's dead. So can I leave that? They probably need a new battery. Okay, so I have spent a lot of time thinking about local government issues, and I want to impart some of that to you, because a lot of it, thank you very much. and not a lot of time learning how to run hand mics, obviously. A lot of it may be surprising to you. I know lots of you are local government experts, but there's a lot about local government that people don't understand because we don't train it in school, which is one of the things we were doing this morning with the high school students. Oh, we are really having electronic problems.
Did that cut off again?
It's okay. So, Andy said we're going to talk about local government, but I really want to talk to you about community and our collective future. So this Connect, Grow, and Prosper, the brand line here of the Chamber is really topical because I would like ultimately to have our local governments connect with your whole community and have all values involved in discussions. And of course, we all want to grow and we all want to prosper in our communities. One of the interesting things that John Naisbitt talks about in Global Paradox is that as the world moves more and more to globalization, the smaller and smaller parts become more and more important. And he was talking in a business sense around financial markets, where millions or billions of people are affecting outcomes rather than monetary funds or gold standards anymore. But I like to suggest the same thing applies in bottom-up from local government, that cities are now more important and probably always were more important than the senior governments, so-called senior governments in our lives. And at the end of the day, I want to talk to you about your money. So this should be of interest to you because local governments do spend a lot of money. They're actually the biggest employer in the public sector in BC, larger than the feds, larger than the province. People don't usually think about that collectively. They usually think about it in July when their individual tax notice comes out year to year. This is a story from the Globe and Mail just on May 6th saying that half of Canada's mid-sized cities haven't recovered from the recession. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is not necessarily specific to Campbell River. In fact, I would argue that Campbell River is the poster child for having moved into making transitions in a positive vein. I can't think of any place else where the mill has shut down in the manner that it did, and the community so abruptly responded, and here we are today with a positive discussion. So you're not alone, but you may be ahead. And you're ahead in another way too. I couldn't come here without just putting in some self-promotion on the fact that I do know a lot about Campbell River because I get to spend a lot of time here and about here doing outdoor things. And one of the things that used to drive me crazy at Nanaimo City Council meetings, because I think Nanaimo is a great place for ecotourism and natural environment and great parks, and people would come to the council chambers and they would frankly bitch about what a horrible place it was to live. And my view on that was, well, why are you here then? You can always up and move. And in fact, Campbell River is a fantastic place to live. We were talking about how Colleen came to come here, not choosing to stay, and has chosen to stay because of the natural environment. So what I tend to find is that people from outside island communities understand that, and sometimes people in island communities forget how lucky they are. So just a little reminder about that. It's a pretty spectacular place. This is paddling just off Quadra. So I'm going to talk to you about democracy. Now, everybody knows last week we had a little thing called an election, and we had a surprising result, which is, we can talk about that, and I'm sure they will be talking about that for years. The part I want to talk about is that the voter turnout of eligible voters was only 52%. Only 52%. So half of the people eligible to vote didn't vote, and of that 52%, I'd like to suggest to you, we don't have good data on this, but I suspect that a large proportion of that 52% was not young people, including people under 40. That's very, very disturbing because those people have to be concerned about the future. Those people's values have to be in the equation. And the way democracy works is if the largest number of people are involved in the conversation. I've already told you that in my view, local government's more important than the senior governments. You might be shocked to know that in the last round of municipal governments across the province, the average was 30%. And that's the average which excludes fully acclaimed councils, of which there's lots of. And lots of fully acclaimed regional district directors, which regardless of the incumbent, I think is shameful for the purposes of democracy, because you can't have a community discussion if you're acclaiming people. So that displays a large disinterest in what's going on, and that should be of concern, which is why sessions like this are so important. The other reason they're so important is we take for granted this little thing called democracy. You know, it's a platitude to say that people die for this, but people are dying for this today. Today. And we take it for granted. Other parts of democracy we take for granted too, around due process and rule of law. In most of the world and a lot of the third world, that is not the case. I have a friend who often tells the story in these kind of classes about his experiences in Argentina, where you can't build a building without paying off the various mobs, the police, the building inspectors, etc. That's the way the world works. So police and our institutions, extremely important here. And even where you have forms of democracy, you don't have full enfranchisement. So I picked this picture because these women look quite modern, but they don't have the right to vote. And you may or may not know that women in Canada didn't get the right to vote till 1917. Until the early 1900s, they weren't even persons in law. And in some provinces, notably Quebec, they didn't really get the right to vote till 1940. Hard to imagine today. So if you think that probably half to more than half of the people in the world in this room today 100 years ago weren't considered persons and weren't allowed to vote until the early 1900s, that's pretty shocking that we only have 52% turnout. Because people struggled to get to that. So I picked these pictures of suffragettes because we tend to think, or I think of the suffragette movement in terms of today's due process and today's support for intervention in governmental processes in non-violent ways. These women are being violated for taking a point of view that they should have the right to be persons and vote. And I think we forget sometimes that the suffragette movement wasn't just going to the council meetings and saying, I should. It was brutally repressed at some times. And if that isn't bad enough, I'm just going to digress to say that it wasn't until 1960 that Aboriginals in this country had the right to vote. And it wasn't until 1963 that there was full universal franchise. So if in 1963 we finally had the position where everyone was entitled to vote, and in 2013 only half of them are taking that opportunity, we need to be worried. We need to be worried, especially if you overlay the demographic reality that most of that 52% will be old guys. And those people have a different perspective for sure than we might want for our community as a whole. So this is from the Globe saying Canadians are quickly losing faith in their democracy. It's a bit of a catch-22 because losing faith in their democracy is a little bit because they're not involved. And where they all are involved, from my perspective, there's often not a lot of informed involvement. So the first role of local governments is to provide services to persons and property. That's pretty straightforward, police, fire, water, blah, blah, blah. And lots of people would say that's the sole role of local government, but it isn't the sole role of local government. There's two roles of local government, and the first one is not to walk in front of the screen, no. The first one is way more important than providing services because you can provide a water system privately. You can provide a sewer system privately. There's lots and lots of private garbage systems you can think of. In some places, they have private fire departments in the States. The real role of local government is to provide a means for collective decision making. So we all get to have a role in what we want for the future of our community. And if we don't exercise our right in that role, then we have skewed outcomes. That's by far the more important part of local government. So we need public education and informed dialogue. And I must congratulate Campbell River and all the participants that organized this today, and particularly this morning, because we don't teach civics in schools at all. When I went to school, they taught us about the BNA Act and stuff like that, which doesn't exist anymore. They didn't teach us anything about civics. And arguably, civics is where we desperately need involvement because the things around environment, the things around urban form, the things about public health and welfare ultimately come to local government. So anybody in this room played SimCity? Nobody. Well, I suggest you go and do it. So SimCity is purely running a city. It's a multi-$100 million business, so it's really exciting. You get out there and have a video game running a city. And you can't win in SimCity. You get to make your decisions on funding, and if you pay the firemen, you can't pay the policemen, and if you pay them both, you can't fix the streets. It's just kind of like life. But the interesting part, from my point of view, is you can't win at SimCity where you're the sole decision maker making the choice. I'll probably irritate everybody as we go along here, so that'll make it more exciting. But I'm always interested when people say, well, Joe Blow businessman should run the city. And I say, absolutely, we need that value. But that sole value doesn't cut it, because Joe Blow businessland, I run my own business, I get to make my own decisions. Everything the city council does has to be made with, at minimum, 7 people on council, but also everybody else in the community, and even the people outside the community. So try playing SimCity where you have to get 7 people to agree. Anybody here married? So sometimes it's hard to get 2 people to agree. 7 people is a real challenge. So I just ask you to think about that when people often think that councils are the 3-ring circus. It's just not as easy as you would think. I used to ride my bike into work in Nanaimo, and these old guys, my age, these old guys were in the coffee shop every day, and we'd have the same joke every day. I'd go in there and they'd say, Jerry, we have all the solutions to the city's problems. And I'd say, that's great. I have 80,000 people with the solutions to the city problems. What I need is one solution that 50% plus one of you agree to and will stand to. And they'd go fight for the day and laugh, and we'd have that same joke every day. The point I'm making is it's really hard, and the council needs your involvement in order to make the right decisions. Wish I had my clicker here. Okay, the other thing that you need to know about councils that even council members, when they get elected, find to their surprise is that the value of local government is that all values come to the table, preferably all values in the community are represented by the council, and every council member is equal, including the mayor. It's an interesting thing in our system because we've got this country below us with 10 times the population and a completely different system. And there you have mayors that are elected political executives who actually can set budgets, who can hire staff. They're like the president, right? They can veto budgets. That's just a different system. We don't have that system. The mayor has immense power in Canada if they exercise it through collective action. They have to bring people along with them. And it takes a majority to do everything, which also makes our system very good and also very difficult. So shared respect and shared power is important for councils, and most of my practice is dealing with shared respect councils. So here from the Globe in February, saying why most Canadians can expect higher taxes. So Annie told me to be upbeat today, but I'm here to tell you, you can expect higher taxes. You can expect higher taxes. I totally believe that this story is correct. And the reason is not because we don't have enough money. The reason is because the system is archaic and broken. And I want to show you some examples of where I think council needs your help to deal with that. So this is what usually happens at council budget meetings. If you went out and you talked to the populace or this room, and you said property, and I just did this in Cowichan Valley, by the way, where we did direct voting, which I think is one of the solutions where you can use direct democracy in the technology. So we would ask this room, and they would vote. And we'd ask them the question, are property taxes too high? And half would say yes, and half would say no. And then we'd ask them the question, should services be improved? And half would say yes, and half would say no. The value of the technology was to display to them that, oh, wait a minute, not everybody thinks like me. Council members get to see that all the time, but often communities without this connection that we're talking about today, people don't necessarily see that. They think everybody wants lower taxes. Not really. There's a whole discussion to be involved. There isn't a local government in Canada that is sustainable in either a financial, social, cultural, or environmental way, because we're based on old systems. So we need to be able to change that if we're going to have prosperous cities which grow in the future. The only things will change is if the only way things will stay the same is if we change. So we have these structural impediments in our little house of cards. The first one is, this is from the Brundtland Commission, which is the UN Commission in 1987 that is the seminal commission around sustainability. It's usually the definition of sustainability that is used. And it says, good city management requires decentralization of funds, political power, and personnel to local authorities, which are best placed to appreciate and manage local needs. Now that's just saying bottom-up decision-making is best. Probably everybody in this room has some sensitivity for that. The problem in Canada, this was in 1987 that they said that. There wasn't a student there this morning that was alive when they said that. And it hasn't changed, and it doesn't exist in Canada. This is from Federation of Canadian Municipalities report. Federation of Canadian Municipalities is the entity representing municipal entities across Canada. They're going to be in Vancouver next week. The Government of Canada says that accountability and clarity of roles and responsibilities requires that each order of government have access to revenue required to fulfill its roles and responsibilities. Each order of government. But the perception is that the federal government's sitting on all this money and the cities aren't getting it. And in fact, that's the case. This is from the federal government's own database. You can see over here, the dark blue line is municipal spending going up, and the other two lines are provincial and federal spending going down. And even where they have grant funding programs, it's a gift horse, because every federal and provincial grant funding program requires you to have your money too. You can't use it to lower taxes. So be very cautious. These are two books, which if you're interested in this, I recommend to you, Time for Cities and Taking Back Our Cities. The fact is that in Canada, only of your tax money, only 8 cents of every dollar goes to local government. Only 8 cents of every dollar. The reason that that's important is because increasingly local governments are doing everything. And this is representative. I just threw this in as a little joke. My friend says, well, you know, I can't figure out how come if 42% of my taxes go to the province and 50% of my taxes go to the federal government, why is the 8% of municipalities always the rallying cry? And he says it's because, it's just because it's so pointed, it hurts more. No, it's because you get to go to your council chambers and you get to talk about this stuff. You can see it. You can see inefficiencies in the system if you drive around. So that's one of the advantages, but I need you to know that this is something that particularly Canadians do not know. So this is from a study from an independent study from the Canada West Foundation talking about why property taxes fail. You'll be surprised to know that in 1961, 17% of all taxation was local. 1961. In 2007, it was down to 9%. Now you say, how can that be? I know what I paid for taxes in 1961 on my house, or some of you do. I know what I pay today. How is that possible? Well, in 1961, we had this little thing happening in the 60s around the social agenda federally, with Medicare and CPP, et cetera. It's not that municipal taxes haven't been going up rapidly. They are, and increasingly rapidly. It's that the senior governments have expanded far more rapidly. This is the really telling one. So, as a percent of taxes, local government was 74% 50 years ago, and it's 24% today and falling. I bet you none of you knew that. And the problem with this slide is it doesn't help you one bit knowing this, because there's only one taxpayer. You know, saying, and that's what we're doing a lot of, and they'll do it next week at FCM. The Fed should give us more money, the province should give us more money. If only we got more money to solve all our problems. No, we need a fundamental shift. Arguably, we've got enough money, it's just how it gets set out. So here's, when you think about your day-to-day stuff, so who used the federal government today? They think of in terms of services. Anybody? Often when I ask this question, people say the police. Well, the police are 90% funded locally. So who used the province's services today? Anybody? Who used their toilet today? Who had breakfast this morning? Who drove in here? Local government is where it's at. They're the ones that are doing the real stuff. 8 cents of every dollar. And feel for your councils, because in every city across BC, on average, 75 to 85% of their expenditures go to only these three areas. So when people say if only the city manager made less money, we wouldn't have a tax increase. If only the council made less money, as you know, instead of 2 cents an hour, we wouldn't need a tax increase. No, 75 to 80% of every budget is in protective services, that's fire and police, parks, recreation and culture, and public works. Not a lot of discretion in protective services. I usually say none. Public works, what are you going to do? Not have toilets, not have water? So historically, you were able to cut back in parks and recreation and culture. When I started in 1981, it was the start of that recession, people would say, well, we'll just hold off on recreation facilities. Well, what's happened in the meantime, and we obviously can do a lot of value for money, but what's happened with recreation in the meantime is that people have got old. And people like their trailways. People like their rec centers. People like their aerobics programs. So cutting parks and recreation and culture really cuts the heart out of the community. And I think that that was the end conclusion that your council came to with this abrupt loss of money from the mill. What were you going to do? Cut the heart out of the community and remove all of those facilities. Because you can do value for money and efficiency issues, but it's very difficult and very slow in local government. So the fast changes are cutting down services. Cut out those services, people come to Campbell River because they come with the trailways, they come to the amenities, they come for the facilities, you cut those out, you kill the economy. So it's a very tough problem. So we need a new relationship with the municipalities in the province. Most municipalities are in this, what these authors call comfortable subordination. I call it increasingly uncomfortable subordination. And back to my little story about changing the family name to Christopher. We have aging citizens. I'm 56. I'm right in the middle of the blip. Those people are going to increasingly cost service costs. We have aging systems, which is probably our biggest problem, and aging infrastructure. I'm going to keep rushing here because this is usually a 3-hour procession. We also have a lot of complexity and change. Ask the police what it takes now to do a file and to respond to one person. It's massively changed than when the inspector started here, and it takes a lot of cost and time and money. Everything's like that. So our property tax system, which is the sole source of revenue for local governments, was designed when Queen Victoria was a little girl. And how much has it changed since then? Not one bit. We designed the property tax system very logically back in England to provide equity around physical services for property. So you think about it, the system was designed, and this is why the assessment authority, you pay more taxes on a bigger house. In history, theory was if you had a bigger house, you had more water connections, bigger frontage, you paid more taxes. That was long before we were doing social stuff and cultural stuff and parks and recreation and any number of things. So it probably never was true that the size of your house represented your wealth, but it might have been 200 years ago. Now it might mean that you're a widow who bought their house in West Vancouver in 1910. And now on paper you're a multimillionaire, but you're eating cat food. There is no relationship between that and the services you consume. So you're paying property taxes on your house, paying for school, there's arguments all around that, but there's no relationship between what you consume. That poses us a big problem for local governments because when this guy runs out of money, which he has a solution. He gives it to this person all across Canada. You'll remember a couple of months ago this happened around health. I'm going to give you provinces what you want around health. I'm going to give you what you want. I'm not going to give you less money. I'm actually going to give you more money over time. And you can decide what to do. Monkey over to you. When this person in every province, I'm not picking on the premier, it's just the way things go, when she runs out of money, she passes it on to cities. So the snow gets pushed from the feds to the province to the city. And where does the city push it? To you. That's the only choice. So this is a fundamental problem that we're dealing with, and you'll hear a lot about it in the media. You'll hear about it next week from FCM. They call it downloading. That's not going down Whistler without your skis. It's being passed on. Okay, so here's what FCM says about reliance on property tax. It says weak relationship with the ability to pay, actually none, doesn't grow with the economy. Income taxes and other taxes grow with the economy. Property taxes don't. If your business falls out, and the economy falls out, you still pay the same property taxes. Tax on capital, bad, perverse incentive. Poor competitiveness, suburban flight. Why would you invest in Nanaimo if you can go build your building in Coombs with no services and no standards? So that runs entirely counter to everything we're trying to do around sustainability and environment. Here's one of the things that FCM said. Remember, these are federal politicians. Can't get enough. I'm not sure I would have said that. It's a bit blunt, but the point is you just can't get enough money. Here's the one that really concerns me, though. It's a poor tool to use for needed policy changes. So in the world, according to Jerry, if you wanted to live on the top of the mountain back here and drive your Hummer up there every day, I say go ahead. I'm kind of non-interventionist. I don't kind of like regulations. Go ahead, but you should pay for it. And that's not the way our system works. Our system has all sorts of subsidies in it built to support the kind of policy decisions that we don't want to, that are inefficient for the rest of us. So we need to see some change in terms of that. And as a result of all of those, what we get is that we're addicted to growth. Now, as per the Chamber's billing here, growth is not bad. In fact, growth is absolutely necessary. If you know anything about science, there's this little term called entropy. And if you let it run down, you die. So we constantly need to be providing energy into the economy to fight that kind of entropy. The thing is that we do things really, really inefficiently and stupidly. Building single-family houses way out in the boonies is about the most inefficient and most costly way to do things possible. So someone was telling me that there's someone here who builds exclusively apartment buildings. Fantastic. It's not that we need to change our forms. If in the world, according to Jerry, I wouldn't have single-family houses because I'd rather see my kids live in an affordable form and have densification. Really, really simple stuff. If you have densification, you can provide cost-effective services. So people say, well, we should have transit like Paris. Well, Paris has 15,000 people per square kilometers, per hectare, I think. Maybe kilometer. Anyway, it's extremely dense. And that's what we need in terms of our costs. Here's the other problem around property taxes, remembering that it's based on physical assets. So this is actually your mill, closed, and I think you've done a fantastic job of responding. But because of this 200-year-old system, the way we value contributions to community is through machinery, land, and buildings. Come on through. So the problem with that is you might be a computer company right down the street. And now the economy is shifting to creativity, tolerance issues, technical issues. And the trouble with that is that the local property tax system doesn't capture that. So you could be a multi-million-dollar computer industry here in town, and you might not be contributing anything to community. You might as a good corporate citizen, but you might not, and the city might not even know you exist. So that's a big, big problem as we move forward. Western Canada's booming growth is straining public infrastructure. Talk a bit about infrastructure. The problem for cities is if you don't pay for infrastructure, you can't support growth. And if you have growth, you need more infrastructure. So that's what this story is talking about here in Alberta, where they have massive growth, and as a result, they can't keep up on infrastructure, and taxes are going up. So you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. This is all what I'm talking about, where we need people to understand in an informed way so they can help change, because the senior governments will change the rules when they understand that the public wants it. Here's the Canadian Infrastructure Challenge. I'm going to use a specific example because we're going very quickly here. So you'll hear about the $2 billion infrastructure deficit, et cetera. All of that kind of people's eyes glaze over. So I use this particular document from the province of BC that says, this is a public document from the province of BC that people wouldn't realize. The percentage of British Columbians served by drinking water systems that meet emerging treatment standards in 2011, the target was 38%, and what they reached was 36%. So state that the other way, 2/3 of the population of BC doesn't have access to safe drinking water. Public document out there, this is what people don't understand, and what people need to know. Because when we take on other sexy expenditures, we assume that the water system is taken care of. Now, you're fortunate in Campbell River and locations like that. But don't think size has anything to do with it. This morning when I was coming in, this came in on my phone, so I had to throw it up here. If you haven't seen this today, 700,000 people in Montreal are on boil water advisories today. Montreal, a cosmopolitan world-class city. So this is the thing that people don't realize. There isn't a government, when I say they're not sustainable, there isn't a government in North America that has done what a business would have to do and depreciate their assets. People think there's money sitting in the bank to repair these water systems. See the bridge in Victoria, $100 million. Do they have money in the bank? So we need people to be aware of that so we can make the right decisions. Here's the other part about local government. So this is from our medical health officer in Nanaimo in December 20th. This is the island medical health officer. He's saying local government has more to do with closing the gap in life expectancy than the health system does. Health across the board is affected by factors such as air quality as well as other environmental and social factors, many of which municipalities exert significant influence over. So here's another problem about the way we're set up in silos. Local government's more important in terms of health prevention than anything else, but you can't get funded that way. And we know how expensive it is to be in hospital. So we need a way to change that. And here's my little point about parks and recreation. So this is from UBCM showing the trends in expenditure. So the green line is general government. It's going down, actually. The blue line is protective services going up, no surprise. But remember, that slope, even though it's low, is big, big dollars. The brown line, the brown line is actually general government. The green is all other. The part that's interesting to me is the red line. The red line is parks, recreation, and culture, which is going up everywhere. And that's as a result of the demographic shift. People expect that stuff. The problem is if you're building sexy recreation stuff, which I certainly would support, and trailways and parks, I would certainly support, and your water systems and sewer systems aren't taken care of, then you have to do those anyway. And then they're taxed on top of that. So we need better information so people understand and aren't just assuming things are taken care of. Now, usually when people hear this stuff, they respond with this, what I call the cult of austerity. No, I just mad as hell and I'm not going to take any more, just cut. You know? If only the city manager didn't make so much money, we wouldn't have to do all of this. Well, it's just not quite that simple. And usually in my experience, when people talk about cut, they mean the other guy. I've been to that budget meeting 30 years in a row. No, I didn't mean me, I meant him. And the business community is making some reasonable points. They're saying municipal spending is out of control and getting worse. All very, very topical stuff. As a result, we have core reviews going on all over the province. I just gave you some examples. Mission spending $100,000. They haven't implemented any changes. Prince George, $400,000. Council wouldn't even consider. I think there was like 180 recommendations. They wouldn't even consider, even talk about more than 14 of them. When the public does talk about cutbacks, they're out, and of course the unions are out too. Here's the City of Toronto, just to give you some idea of the problem. So they spent $1 million on a core review. And the consultants who were high-end, this is KPMG, accountants, say 90% of the services are defined as core. That is, they're legislated or essential, i.e. we can't do anything about them. 8% are traditional, i.e. they enhance the quality of life and contribute to a healthy economy. Well, let's cut those. And 1% respond to emerging needs and priorities. Now, we all should know that in a business environment, when times get tough, what you really need to do is spend some money on research and development and where are we going. So let's cut that. So they spent $1 million here to find out, gee, there's not a lot we can do in the short term. We need to change some system stuff. And this is my argument. I actually kind of like the Trudeau line here, reason over passion. You know, we have this idea that we're missing all this tax money and we're getting ripped off. We're doing things stupidly. Large part of that is systemic. I actually think there's more than enough money in the system if we were to do things intelligently. So here business is saying, this is what this Canadian Federation of Independent Business is very successful in saying, look, this is outrageous. Growth in operating expenditures in municipalities is exceeding population and inflation. It's outrageous. I say, well, duh, of course it is. Of course it is. It has to. The only way those expenditures would be the same as population inflation is if municipalities were doing two things. They were doing exactly the same thing next year as they were doing last year, and no city is. They're taking on more and more services. And everything they were doing last year, they were doing perfectly. Anybody think the government's doing everything perfectly? Of course not. So absolutely this is happening. The real point that they need to be making sort of is this sustainable? Absolutely not. So we have to do something about it. But it should be no surprise that they're exceeding operating expenditures, because if you don't, this is no different than operating your house. If you spend 20 years and not amortizing your roof and putting money away, and now you have to fix your roof, yeah, your expenditures are going to exceed last year's expenditures. And that's what every city's doing. And here's the other side of the business coin. So this is the Canadian Chamber of Commerce in 2006 saying high quality infrastructure has a pervasive, long-lasting impact on the economy. It's critical in encouraging private sector investment. So again, damned if you do, damned if you don't. If you don't provide the infrastructure, you can't have those kind of investments. If you don't have those kind of investments, you can't get the tax dollars, you can't pay for the infrastructure. You guys are all going to need a beer by the end of this, I think. And here's another problem about local governments, which is kind of near and dear to my heart. So this was back in the 1700s that Alexander Fraser Tyler said this. A democracy can't exist as a permanent form of government. It can only exist until the majority discovers it can vote itself largest out of the public treasury. So I could go on about that for an hour, but the public sector unions, everybody has a self-interest, and the public sector unions are very, very good on getting organized and getting out the vote. So it shouldn't be a surprise that they support candidates who will support money to their self-interest. It's not a bad thing. That's actually our system. The bad thing is if the public sector unions are organized and the rest of the taxpayers aren't, guess where the money's going to go? That's the issue. And huge resistance to change. This is actually in France, where they're trying to change pensions. Very difficult for politicians who are elected to be representatives. But here's the real problem. I don't have good Canadian data on this, unfortunately. But here's the problem in my point of view in terms of sustainability. So the top lines are, this is US data. The top lines are state, local, and federal employment over time. And the red line is private sector employment over time. So it's pretty obvious that that's not sustainable when the people down here working split shifts with no benefits and no pensions are paying for these guys' wages. Not sustainable. And eventually, that will become a big problem. I'd like it to be addressed in an evolutionary way rather than a revolutionary way, but we will see. So steps towards solving the problem. So the first is, this is kind of like AA. The first step is acknowledging the problem. Here's one of the problems, and I just do this in a comical way, but I think it suggests the problem with our system. So why does public leadership and representative democracy have to do with eating ice cream? Don't answer if you've heard this before, which some of the council members here have heard many times. Why is it related to eating ice cream? Here's why. So there's 2 kids in my family and my wife. And if we were a representative democracy, we'd have ice cream every meal. 3 to 1. And my wife would have some core values and a strategic plan, and she'd say food values and, eat your vegetables. And we'd say, who made you, Mom? We're voting for ice cream every meal. And we're sure as hell not voting for somebody who won't give us ice cream. And we're really not voting for somebody who's proposing to take our ice cream away. So we kind of have this system that doesn't even let you talk about, well, maybe ice cream once in a while, or maybe low-fat sorbet, or maybe alternatives. You can't even talk about that. It's a debate about the cult of austerity or give me ice cream. And we need to fix that. Because now we need politicians who are prepared to say, no, we're going to change values. You're not going to like it in the short term. Nobody likes change anyway. But there's a few things that we do really stupidly that we have to change. And politicians need to have your help in making that happen. Because it's pretty lonely when you're up there with people screaming at you, just give me ice cream. The other step to the solution is recognition that there is never going to be enough money, ever. We spend a lot of time at the senior levels. You'll see it again next week at FCM. If only the feds gave us more money, we wouldn't have any problems. If only the province gave us more money, we wouldn't have any problems. If only the city manager didn't make so much money, sorry Andy, we wouldn't have any problems. And the reality is there's never going to be enough money. There's an infinite number of good things to do in the community. So council has to make hard choices. And where we get in trouble is thinking that we can be all things to all people. Life is about choices, and we have to be able to say no. So I usually say, who here is a parent? Who here was a child? There's some people not sure they're parents, right? Who here was a child? Okay, so would you be a good parent if you always said yes? Of course not. You have to know what your principles are. You have to have a plan. You have to have values. You have to know when you can say no. You can't say yes to everything. But our system is set up to reward, in a political sense, it appears, people that will say yes to ice cream. The other thing in terms of the solution is to recognize, back to my principles about, look, it's not just running services, it's about decision making and the governance. Government is not a business. We could have an hour discussion about that. I just put BC Ferries in here as an example of an ideology that thought you could run it like a business and found out, oh, maybe we can't. There's certain issues around public services that cannot be run like a business. Doesn't mean they can't be run more entrepreneurially. Doesn't mean they can't be run with value for money, et cetera, but they can't be run like a business. Just the requirements on freedom of information alone makes it very difficult to run some of these natural monopolies like a business, as David Hahn will tell you. We need to do a better job of aligning beneficiaries with costs and adequately considering temporal equity. So this issue about temporal equity, I don't know how to solve unless younger people are more engaged. One of the solutions to getting younger people more engaged actually exists today. It's these smartphones. It's social media. There's no reason why people can't vote weekly on issues if we change the systems. And the city of Nanaimo tried many, many years ago to try to get the province to move to even internet voting. So I was saying to Colleen, you know, I haven't been in my bank for 10 years because the banks had to shift so that they could accommodate people 24 hours a day, and they've done that with technology. City Hall, not so much, especially around voting and decision making, because the legislation doesn't allow us to. The local governments want to, the senior governments won't let us. And we need that to have this full conversation. Democracy isn't going to work where this number of people aren't involved in the decision making, which is the good result from last week. 52% is actually pretty good. The other thing about solution is, and people, this is actually from the mayor of Pasadena, I really like this model. He says, you know, the thing that local government is actually really good at, that senior governments aren't good at, is this barn raising model. And this is how we used to do things in Nanaimo, which I'm most familiar with, and Peter would be very familiar with. You know, there's Gyro Park, there's Rotary Park, there's Sir Roxman Park, there's Rotary Bowl, et cetera. All of those are public facilities, the curling club, that were built in the 20s with volunteerism on this barn raising model. So you get some volunteers, you get some technical people and engineering people, you get some bought services, you get some donated services, and you get a fantastic product. And we need to go back to that. We tend to do things now with all in-house forces, which is extremely expensive and not the best outcome in many, many cases. One of the reasons is I often tell council members that their most important strategic plan is not their strategic plan, not their OCP, not any of those, it's their collective agreement. Go read the collective agreement. I can tell you that the collective agreement in Nanaimo hasn't changed since the 70s, except upward and restrictive. So when you're trying to do things in 2013 with a 1970s collective agreement, it's pretty hard to operate, and a 200-year-old property tax system. The other thing in terms of solution is it's important for people to recognize that local government is just excruciatingly slow. It's just the way it is, and if you're going to consult with people, it takes time and effort. So local government's like this super tanker. You can change the super tanker, but to do it, you have to start really early. You have to know where you want to be. You have to turn the helm, and you have to hold it over with a lot of force for a long time. If you want to be there in 2015 for a council, I usually, when I'm telling councils on orientation at the start, you want to be at this major change at the end of your term, you've got to start today. Today. Because it takes that long to change. And the idea that you can just change abruptly is not the case. It can't be done. It can be done, but it takes a lot of foreplanning and effort. So this is, I think that the mayor of Saanich got it exactly right when in 2011 he was talking in his own budget process. He said, well, all of us want to be optimistic about our economy. We'll need to be realistic about our budget meetings. Continuing to focus on infrastructure replacement will mean a need to continue increasing capital spending while keeping operating costs and services in check. So it's a little combination of everything. You are the solution. We're going to have changes come whether we want it or not. So I'm really advocating that you get involved and get more people involved. This is a great start. And I'm going to stop there and ask for any questions. Thank you very much. You look Everybody needs a beer now? You know, it's a good news story. I just want to stop. It's a good news story in Campbell River. As I say, I don't know that you appreciate the challenge that this council was faced with on coming in. I don't know anybody else who's had the mill stop so abruptly. We've had Skeena, et cetera. In Nanaimo, they had a different situation with Harmac. In my world, some of the changes that the municipality instituted helped with Harmac, and that was years ahead on the supertanker model. But really, Campbell River has done a fantastic job in a short time of turning the corner with an abrupt hit to the tax base. And things like the Berwick announcement yesterday is really probably your future for all of us on Vancouver Island. Ecotourism and retirement are industries in and of themselves. It'll be different, but it can be just as positive. Anyway, questions? Well, when I say they're not sustainable, local governments aren't going away. They're going to be here. But they, first and foremost, like anything, in order to be healthy, they have to be financially sustainable. To do the other things they want to do around culture and social issues and environment, they have to be financially healthy. To be financially healthy, in the world according to Jerry, they don't need more taxes. They need tools that allow them to use consumption taxes. Because consumption taxes respond to the economy and allow them to, you can use them for as policy instruments to affect the kind of things around environment and social, et cetera, that we might like. So that also deals with the subsidization issues. I mean, if it were me, I might have, even go so far as to have a negative tax zone to allow densification in downtown Campbell River, and then have taxes increasingly increased as you move further from the core, because the fact is, as you move further from the core, it costs a lot more money. And when you do very low density subdivisions, it's very expensive. You can imagine, people don't think about this, but it's pretty simple if you actually were to have the conversation. In Nanaimo, there's some huge houses on 5-acre lots. Every one of those lots requires water, sewer, garbage, fire flows, and if you space them out across 5 acres, it's extremely expensive. It's pretty simple. So I think that would be the first one. We have to get our financial house in order, and I would argue that it can't be done on the route that we're on right now. We need some changes. You know, when the province did the community charter, there was all sorts of talk about new revenue sources for local government. None. Zero. Now, the answer is having a diverse base. In the States, there's lots of municipalities that do have all sorts of alternative revenue sources. The trouble they got themselves into is they are responsive to the economy. So they built in all this overhead, and when the economy died, and their sale taxes stopped, and their income taxes stopped, they're screwed. The real choice is not to have, it's not have all your eggs in one basket, but a proper mix of tools. The other thing I would do is, wherever possible, move to user fees and consumption taxes on direct services. Because I don't think that people are so frustrated with taxes as they're frustrated with not knowing where their taxes go or what they get for it. So there's all sorts of tools in the Act that councils can use to specified areas, local improvement areas, special assessment districts. Regions are really good at this, where no ticket, no laundry. If you pay, this is the service you get, and you can make a better relationship between what you pay and what you get. And I would extend that, so far as user fees were really bad on this, into right down to zero. So most municipalities still, under the old system, have a block fund, even where they've scaled funding. Garbage is a good example. So there's a block funding where I say, no, let's go to full user fees. If you want to have 20 cans, you should pay for 20 cans on a fee like this. If you want to go to Scottsdale and have 0 fans, you should be able to pay 0. Most municipalities, you can't. They've done the positive part of the demand curve, but they haven't got it down to 0 yet. And to me, if you're not using the service, why should you pay? Well, the way it's going, they're going to increase, and municipalities are going to continue to increase, and they're going to continue to increase. So it depends on whether they increase faster than municipalities do. I suspect they will. I suspect they will.
By 2020?
In terms of the number, I think it'll be less than 8 cents. Great. Yeah, thank you, Colleen. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks, Jerry. A lot of what you were talking about, I was making notes, and I think Andy said that the PowerPoint's going to be available, so I stopped taking notes after a little bit. But really resonated talking about value and the infrastructure and the sustainability. I'm just heading off to the BC Chamber AGM tomorrow, and over the next 4 days, we're going to be talking about policy development, and the kind of policies that we've identified as a priority are many of them very much what you've just identified, Jerry. We see that it's such a symbiotic relationship between the health of the community and the health of business, and if we don't get some of those right and we don't make those shifts, we're really setting ourselves up for some challenges down the way. And so these are the kind of policies that we're going to be debating, and I really look forward to bringing back the viewpoint of not only our local businesses, but many of the discussions that we've had at the city, and be interesting to see what we end up voting on, but certainly municipal sustainability and a new funding model are two of the things that the Chamber, the BC Chamber, are clearly debating over the next couple of days. I just want to thank you, Jerry. A great conversation. You were right when Andy told me you were animated and a great public speaker. You certainly are. But more importantly, the messages you brought today were really relevant to our community and relevant to everybody here in the room. Thank you to the city for creating this opportunity. Thank you to each of you for being here today. And just to close off, we have a draw. I think Lindsay is going to come up and do that. The Typemark Theatre generously donated 2 tickets to one of their presentations, so we're going to do a quick draw for that. And Jerry, on behalf of the Chamber, we'd like to make a donation to your favorite charity. That would be the local municipality, but anyway, and we'll make sure that we follow up with you about that. But thank you again to everyone, and I'll just turn over to Lindsay to make the draw.